Okay, today we're going to go over bringing your model into Mudbox and the first step of this process, which is going to be doing the sculpt, most of the sculpt here. So the overall process here is we're going to take this model, we're going to import it into Mudbox and kind of finish sculpting it. And once that model is ready, we're going to bring it back into Maya again and UV it. And that'll be a pretty quick process. And then once we UV it, we're going to bring it back into Mudbox and add texturing and detail sculpting and texturing. And then finally bring it back into Maya for rendering. So there's a lot of steps there, but it's not as complicated as it sounds. And so this step that I'm going to demonstrate today is taking this basic model that we have in Maya and importing it into Mudbox and doing that first step of sculpting here. Okay, so first I'm just going to press 3 to see what this model is basically going to look like here. That looks okay to me. You don't have to subdivide this before bringing it into Mudbox because we'll be subdividing in there. So that's something you can do, but you don't have to do it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go up to File and Send to Mudbox. Send as a new scene with the model selected there. So you'll see this bar come up. And just take Mudbox a second here. So since we haven't UV'd this model yet, this error message is going to come up with incomplete UV set. That's okay here. This says some UVs are too close together. That is generally okay when that happens. We'll just take a close look at the mesh, but these two error messages are par for the course for this particular pipeline. So we're going to click Keep this mesh, say OK. And so typically if it's not UV'd, you'll see these kind of red dots showing down here. They're kind of, it's a kind of error message here. And so first thing we want to do is just get rid of those dots. And so we go to Display, and then Mesh Errors is unchecked. And so if you check it, that'll just kind of get rid of those. And so one thing, I would be alarmed if those red dots were showing up here, but they always show up at the bottom of the mesh when it's not UV'd, and so if they show up just around the bottom like they did there, you're probably in good shape. If you see some red dots up here and up here, those kinds of areas, then you might have a problem. So if we press W right now, we'll see the wireframe of the mesh. Again, that was W that I just pressed to get that shortcut. This standard material right here is something that I don't typically work in, and so I'm just going to click over here on the gray light material. These materials, unlike Maya, it doesn't actually physically change the material of the object. It just changes the appearance of it depending on what you want to see when you sculpt. And so everybody's a little different here, and so some of you all might prefer to sculpt on something that's got a little shine to it. It's just all down to personal preference. This isn't going to go back into Maya. I choose this gray light one because it's just kind of the most like a standard shader in Maya, and so when you bring it back into Maya using that shader, for me, I found that it just kind of has the least amount of surprises there. So one thing to keep in mind here is attached to this D12 video, down below I have a list of helpful shortcuts here, and I'll be going over them in the video, but the shortcuts are there for review below the video. So the first thing we want to do is this mesh has got a pretty low subdivision level, and so you can either go up to Mesh and add new subdivision levels, or press Shift Control D, Shift D. And so if we do that, just press Shift D, you'll see we added a new level here. So it's now at 3,480 polygons. So this is the equivalent of if I smooth the geometry in Maya. So one thing that's really fun about working in Mudbox is it can handle way more geometry than Maya can, because it's not having to render it, and it's purely kind of a sculpting and texturing program, so it's just designed to be able to handle a lot more polygons. So we can even add just one more subdivision level there to get it to 13,000, and we'll probably add another one here in not too long. So that is kind of our steps to getting started here. The last step to get started here is, you'll see I'm toggling around here, and the way I'm doing that is I'm pressing Option on the keyboard just like I would in Maya. I am using the stylus currently, and I highly recommend that everyone here does use the stylus. This isn't going to work with a standard mouse. And so in order to set up your stylus to work correctly, you just need to find your Wacom desktop center if you're using a Wacom tablet. And so and it should be just kind of like a circle with a W there. We go to Pin Settings, double click on Pin Settings, and then right here, this tab right here, it is typically set to, I believe the standard is double click, and you'll just want to move that to middle click. And so if you move that to middle click, it'll make it so that you are able to pan with your camera, which is very helpful here. So one last thing for getting started here is F is focus in Maya, and F does kind of focus in Mudbox, but it zooms in all the way in on where your cursor is. So if you look at the size of my cursor right there, and I'll just make my cursor a little bigger here, and I'll press F and it'll zoom in to where my cursor is pointed and the scale of the cursor, or proportional, it zooms in proportional to the scale of the cursor. So if I make the cursor smaller, or the brush size smaller, and I press F again, it zooms way in. If what you want to do instead is just kind of snap back to a view of the model, instead of F, the shortcut is A. And again, that's in the shortcut list below the video here. So let's look at the different areas and kind of understand the interface here before we get started. So before you kind of see all these, and we'll get to these as the semester goes along here, but material presets is kind of the main thing we want to look at when we're getting started. I like gray light, which is what I just showed here. Down here, we have these different kinds of tools available. And so the Sculpt Tools is kind of the main thing we'll want for this stage. We also have the Select Move tools. So if we click that tab, you'll see you have your Transpose tool, so you can move your model around just the same way you would in Maya here. If this sculpt is a little small, and generally speaking, it's pretty helpful just to have the model be a little bit on the large side in Mudbox, because the larger it can be too large as well, but if it's the right size, the brush tool, when you use it, will you won't have to adjust the brush tool quite as often. So let's see, going back to the Sculpt tools here, I'm going to go over these real quick. So the main Sculpt tool, I clicked on it, and you'll see that nothing came up here. So you just need to double click on it, and you'll see these settings appear here. So we got the size of the brush, which you can adjust using this slider. We got the strength of the brush. So right now, let's see here, I have it on invert. So the strength is pretty low, and so when I sculpt, it's about like that. And then if you increase the strength, it goes out much further there. Additionally, there is the invert function here, which normally the brush adds, if you look at it, and then if you press the invert function, it'll recess in. The shortcut for that is generally Control, although that shortcut is not working on my computer today, so you might see me kind of reach over here to get that invert function. And the Sculpt tool is just very much your standard kind of brush here. It's very rounded. And and it's a pretty good brush. So one really helpful tool, which you'll see right next to the Sculpt tool, is the Smooth tool. And no matter which tool you're in under here, if you just hold Shift, it'll do the Smooth tool. And so you won't see me kind of click on that tool very often, because at any point I can just hold down Shift and it does the Smooth. And you'll see that the Smooth tool, it just takes out any harsh edges here. And we'll see this as this demo continues here, but the higher the subdivision of the geometry, kind of the less the Smooth tool does. And so this is still a pretty low subdivision level for Mudbox. And so the Smooth tool irons things out pretty rapidly here. And so the more you subdivide, right, the more you add new subdivisions to this mesh, the kind of more gradually the Smooth tool kind of be more and more subtle here. So that's the Sculpt tool and the Smooth tool. And one thing that I do a lot, instead of kind of going down here and clicking on these and clicking here, is I'll just hold down the space bar and I'll get this shortcut menu. And so this shortcut menu, you can adjust your brush size by just dragging up and down on this button right here. And so that's just a much quicker way to adjust your brush size than either kind of stumbling around looking for this or just kind of moving your cursor all the way over here. Additionally, this right here is the intensity of the brush. And so the closer that that black dot is to the center of the circle, the more subtle the brush is going to be. So if it's up like this, the brush is going to be a lot stronger right there. And then if I just take that and drag it down to be closer to the center, it's going to be more subtle. And when you work with a larger model, there's a little more, how do you say this? It's a little easier to kind of find the sweet spot there for that. And so right now I'm just holding down Shift and smoothing things out to kind of undo these demonstrations so my model doesn't get too crazy looking here. So going over some more things here, if you press and hold right here, you see this is the same icon as the Sculpt tool right there. So we press and hold, and we can choose all the different kinds of tools that you see down here. So the space bar is a shortcut for that as well. Additionally, that you remember how I scaled the model up. If you go down to here and you press that and hold, you can go to Translate, Rotate, or Scale, or go back to select the object here. So if I want to scale the model up, instead of kind of tapping through here, you can just press spacebar, go down to here, and go to Scale there, and just continue to scale it up. And so the spacebar is just a shortcut that it just really simplifies Mudbox a whole lot, I feel like. So I'll press A to focus on the object again, and I'm going to double click the Sculpt tool to kind of get out of the transpose tool there. And so kind of going on to my next tool here that I want to demonstrate, there's a few more I want to show here for this demo. I'm not going to go into all of these for this demonstration because there's only a few that we really need, and we can go through and kind of discover the others here as the class progresses here. So the next one, which is one of my favorites, is the Wax tool, which is a whole lot like the Sculpt tool. It just behaves a little differently. And so with the Wax tool, it's in invert right now. So I'll just bring that back to normal. It just kind of builds things up a little differently than the Sculpt tool in a slightly more kind of organic way, I feel like, or that's kind of more suitable to my style at least. And so I'm just, again, I'm kind of smoothing that out there. So I am at subdivision level 3, and the way to see that, you remember we subdivided before by going to mesh add new subdivision levels. And if you want to move back and forth between subdivision levels, you just page up and page down on the model. If you're on a Mac laptop and you don't see a page up and page down, if you press function and then up or down, it'll do it. So if I want to move down a subdivision level, I'll just press function and down. You'll see I'm back down to level 1 with 3,480 polygons. So the advantage of working in a lower subdivision level is that when you sculpt if you're kind of trying to think broadly when you sculpt, working in a lower subdivision level sometimes can help kind of add geometry, and then later when you subdivide it, it'll be a smoother model in the end here. So that's just something to consider. One other way you can kind of see your subdivision levels is if we look up here, we've got our layers menu, this is a whole lot like Photoshop, this layers menu, and I'll show that later in this tutorial. Then we have the object list here, which is a whole lot like the outliner in Maya. And so here we can kind of see our materials, the light for the scene, our cameras, and then here's the stump. And then if you click on that and you click the plus, it turns yellow. Objects turn yellow in Mudbox when you select them. We can see the different subdivision levels, and so we can even see the properties of it. So the model that I imported had 870 faces to it, subdivided it to 3,000, and then the highest I have right now is at 13,000 polygons. So that's one other way that you can kind of see your subdivision levels. And again, that's in it's the object list tab that's in the top right here. And we will go over this window later. Just take note that there's a sculpt and a paint tab here. And so since we're sculpting, we're going to want to be in the sculpt tab over there. So the wax brush behaves exactly like the sculpt brush, or sorry, much like the sculpt brush, just slightly different behavior there. The next brush I want to show is the grab tool, which is a lot like the soft selection tool in Maya that we showed before. So you can just grab and pull different areas. So I'm pulling out a lot right there. And this is particularly good on low subdivision levels here if you just want to make some adjustments to your model here. So I'm going to press function down and get all the way back down to the bottom and use the grab tool just to kind of, I'm going to go up one subdivision level, just to kind of make a few little shifts to the shape. So this is just a way to work quickly to just broadly change some proportions of the model and to kind of make big changes to things. If we press W, you'll see that it's kind of moving the topology with it. And so if, for instance, I want this slice part of the stump to angle down more, this is a good tool to do that because you're grabbing the geometry and pulling it down. And this is the exact reason why I'm weighted to UV the model, is because I just kind of, during the stage, I like to be free to change kind of the layout of the topology or the proportions of the topology a little bit and not have to worry about, oh man, how's this messing with my UV map? You know, it's just kind of freeing us up to still be creative during the stage. So that's kind of the philosophy I have for waiting to UV till the next step. So just going to make a few more adjustments here to this model. I know this is a demo, so don't need to get it perfect. So I'll press W again to get rid of that wireframe, and then function and up to move up to the higher subdivision levels that I'd already created. And remember, so page up or function and up is the way that you move up subdivision levels, but if you want to actually add a subdivision level, you press Shift plus D or go to Mesh, add new subdivision level right here. Sorry, right there. So we've gone over the Sculpt tool, the Grab tool, the Smooth tool, and the Wax tool. One other tool that I would like to show here is the Flatten tool. And so let's look at this bevel up here at the top. And let's just say that I want to kind of add facet to it here. I find that the Flatten Tool is really helpful for a lot of applications here, but particularly for tree stump. And I might add another subdivision level here now. So press Shift plus D, added a new subdivision level. And so what you'll see here is that it's creating a kind of a, it flattens out where you sculpt here. And so I find it helpful, especially for a tree stump, because a tree stump isn't like perfectly rounded like that. I just find it helpful for kind of adding some new details into here. It's just going to take a moment. I'm going to add another subdivision level just to see what we have. So right now it's at 200, basically 200,000 polygons, which is, believe it or not, still not that high in Mudbox. We don't want to go too high here. I think that's the highest I'm going to go for this because we're not going to get into the detailing stages, but I also just want to be able to kind of make some of these bevel sculpts without kind of the aliasing that might happen in a lower subdivision level mode. So you can even I'm holding Shift right now. Don't like that. So that just kind of changes that bevel there. So I'm going to take a moment and work with the wax tool just to kind of build out the shape the way I want a little bit more. So double click on the wax tool. I can actually move down a subdivision level to 55,000 here. And you don't have to follow exactly what I'm doing with the subdivision levels here. This is just the way I'm working here. And don't worry too much when you're sculpting. You'll see that I have this kind of texture going on here, but when I export this model back into Maya for UVing, I'm not gonna import it back into Maya at a high enough subdivision level for all these little how do you say this? These kind of pretty little brushes to show up here. And so when I import it back into Maya, it's gonna be at a lower subdivision level than this. So it's gonna probably look let's see here. So the subdivision level is not cooperating here, because that's not indicative of what this level is here. But when I import back into Maya, I'm probably going to import it back in at maybe 13,000. That's probably the likely number there. So just kind of keep that in mind. That so we're not worrying. I mean, we are getting the shape of this model here, but we're not going to. Don't worry about texture, I guess, is the main thing I'm trying to say. So one thing too is you'll notice that I have this area down here. This is just a trick that I was talking to a student about here recently about, and I wanted to try it out for this example, is so we're going to have a floor plane or a ground plane kind of under here. And so kind of adding this cylinder down here just kind of gives us a little area where the geometry can overlap with the ground and not have any kind of gaps show through. And it's also, I'm finding that it's helpful in that since I'm sculpting the roots here and I'm not having to worry about sculpting along the edges, it kind of frees me up to do some things I normally wouldn't be able to do. So definitely don't feel like you have to do that. That's, I mean, it's just purely a choice here. But it's that's the reason that cylindrical extrusion is at the bottom there. Okay, so one additional tool I want to show is this area right here. I want to define a little bit more. So I'm going to show the freeze tool in a moment. First, I'm going to use the flatten tool to kind of create a bevel, sort of like what I did up here towards the top. And remember, whenever I get this menu, I'm just pressing spacebar. This is the brush size right there. So if I just flatten that, I'm just trying to get an edge that behaves a little bit more like what you might see in nature. So this is a little rough, but we'll continue to work on that. So the freeze tool is a tool that is essentially a mask, and so if you press it, you get these same controls right here. Strength is at 100. You want it to be at 100 99% of the time. And so when I paint, it's going to be blue. And essentially wherever this model is painted blue, in the future where I sculpt on it, it won't do anything. So this area is kind of protected. And this is just a super helpful tool. If anyone's thinking, oh, I won't need that, you know, second guess that instinct, because I think this is a super helpful tool for a lot of different applications here. So this is just one of just, many different ways you can use the tool. And so I'm just gonna paint it out here. Okay, so it's still a little rough, but just gonna clean it up a little bit. And so now if I go to, let's just say I go to the Sculpt tool, double click it, and then I go to invert. So it's gonna push in. When I paint, it doesn't do anything. But when I paint out here, you see that it's subtracting. So why I drew it there is, and I'm gonna go down to subdivision level, oops. Scratch that. So I'm gonna just sculpt in. And you see that that outside area is protected there. So I've got the invert on, so this brush is moving inward, and then I'm whenever you see this happening, I'm using the smooth tool a lot here just to kind of make sure that this thing doesn't get too raisiny here. And definitely try to vary how hard you're pressing down on the tablet here. And that's another way to get some variation here. So let's just say that this is kind of achieve the effect that I want. If you press Shift plus U, that will kind of clear the freeze mask that you made there. And so, all right, so we're ready to kind of start working again. And I'm going to use the Flatten Tool. And I'm going to move up geometry. Not afraid to use the grab tool here, even late in the game, because we are just trying to find the form. So if I was sculpting a character, I'd be kind of going about this differently. I'm kind of embracing that this is getting a little wrinkly here. If you're sculpting a character here, you would probably want to go about this a little differently than I'm doing right now. But since I am sculpting a tree, I am totally okay with a lot of what's happening here. Okay, so the pinch tool, let's just say that I want this to be, the fall off to be less gradual here. So, if you do the pinch tool here, do you see how that's kind of, it sharpens edges here? So I just run it along the edge. Okay, so that was just me using the pinch tool. If it wasn't clear what it was just doing, I'm going to edit undo. And do it again. You see how it kind of loosened up there? See, I'm going to just take the intensity up some. So the pinch tool is just helpful for kind of tightening some things up like that. So I'm using the standard brush now, and it's inverted. It's just feeling like, even though we go to a lower subdivision level, some of this texture will kind of come through the overall model. The bulge tool here, this is getting a little too flappy there. So the bulge tool just takes the geometry and kind of inflates it some. The scrape tool, so you can kind of see, and I'm just like obsessing over that little area, aren't I? The scrape tool is kind of like the flatten tool a little bit. It's just like scraping off a little bit of the clay. Okay, so when it's time to save, I like to save it so the Maya project I was working in is demo, and then scenes, and you see that I have these different iterations here. And I'm going to name this, what should I name this? So you don't have to name it like this, but so I'm naming it Mudbox. Like I put it in a Mudbox. This is round A, so I'll do round B, A, B, for the different stages here. So I'll know that this is like that sculpting stage, and then version 1. Within that, I'm going to save that within the scenes in the project folder. So press save right there. What I'm going to do with the model here is remember that the layers view is here, and this is something that I'll go over here soon. I feel like we're going over enough here in this assignment or this project so far. So under the object list, when we click here, we have the cameras, we have the light, we have the materials, and here we have the stump. And then if you press this plus button right here, we have the different subdivisions within the stump. So level 0 is what I imported into the scene initially. It's a really small, just 870 faces. Really, really low level right there. Then the second level that we added brought it up to 3,000. Some of you might want to use this as subdivision similar to this, depending on what your computer can handle, but I think I would recommend, I feel like 13,000 is actually a really good number here. If you have like a crazy computer, you might even be able to pump it up to 55, but that might be a little over the top here. So if you have a subdivision level that's kind of in that range, somewhere around 13,000, select that there, and then let's go up to File, and we're going to send to Maya. And I'm going to send this selected as a new scene here. When I did it as, when I updated a current scene, it kind of caused a glitch to happen. And yeah, it's good to start fresh anyway here. So we're just going to send selected as a new scene. And we want to send the mesh at the current subdivision level because I just chose it here under the object list, Stump. And then I chose the level that I thought had the right amount of faces here. And that'll just take one moment. I'm going to go down to Maya here. And so if it looks black like this, that means that the model is just really big. And so the camera's inside of the model right now. So if we just go over to the outliner, press the stump, you'll see that the geometry is there. And if we press F, we'll zoom out to the geometry here. And now we have this model that has some nice little detail in it. The geometry is a little bit on the high side if you are kind of working on an animation or something like that, but since this is a project where we're going to be highlighting the model and then rendering a still frame using Arnold here, this mesh amount is actually pretty good here. So the next step that we'll go over after this is I'm going to show you all how to UV this model.